All right. Let's see who we have popping in.
Daniel, with your new background, how are you feeling?
Feeling good, feeling good.
Refreshed.
For the attendees rolling in, I previously looked like I was being held hostage, so I had to kind of flip my desk around for a little better view.
Totally. I feel like the start of every year needs to come with sort of an updated background, either digitally or, actually.
100%. And don't be fooled by all the books Will's got in the background. He probably hasn't opened any of them, but
still learning how to read. But yeah, we'll get there.
Totally. Cool. All right. We are just gonna trickle in. We got some people rolling in here. Give it another minute or so.
Cool.
But, yeah. Cool. Let's just get started. I know we got a lot to talk through today. People trickle in for a little bit, but thank you guys, everybody, for joining. We got an expert here today, somewhat of an expert, in Will, who's partner in crime. Will and I actually grew up together prior to Dirty Hands. Will and I spent some time in high school running track together. Been friends kind of all throughout our time, and have gotten the pleasure to work together at Dirty Hands. Will being more of that kind of big mind, visionary retail execution, building brands, and me more on the operations, finance. How do you turn this into a business end? So we've had a great kind of relationship and skill sets working throughout. So Will is my expert at retail. Whenever I want to learn anything about how do you build a brand, why does brick and mortar matter, what can we do to actually kind of accelerate velocities, Will's my go-to. So I wanted to get him on the line and really share these things. I know a lot of brands are really thinking about their brick and mortar strategy, and there's a ton to start with, right? Where do I start? What retailers matter? What can I do in those retailers? And then how do I focus my time? So we're going to get into all of that, but I'm going to start by introducing Will. And Will, can you give a little bit of a background on Dirty Hands yourself, and then kind of what we're doing from this perspective, and then we'll jump into some deeper questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't let this joking nice guy attitude fool you. I think when you decide to work with family and friends, you need the basis of your relationship to be strong, right? Because there are going to be those moments where you're head to head talking about what needs to happen, and disagreements are part of this business, right? But when it's rooted really in something that matters, you always get past sort of the stuff you think really is important, but really at the end of the day, what matters most is sort of how you're working together. So I fell into this thing about 10 years ago. My dad, who had worked in the beverage and beer space for a while, needed some help representing brands in the Northeast region of Whole Foods. And so I showed up to my first store with my shirt tucked in, a recent college grad, feeling like I had something to bring to the world, and got, sort of shoved out of the stores and ignored. But by just showing up to these accounts with the mentality that says, how do I make sure this brand that I'm working on behalf of is in the right position to succeed on this given day, right? You begin to see how the system works. You begin to see how retailers operate, right? How space is determined, how velocity is associated with space. What are the pitfalls of growing a brand? And really, it was such an eye-opening experience to recognize that building a CPG brand is entirely dependent upon where you show up in store and how often you're there, and what kind of impact or affinity you have at store. So long story short, got to a point with myself, my father, my sister, brother-in-law, brother, that we all started bickering and fighting, and we needed some expertise from the outside to come in, and that's where Dan showed up and helped put a more structure around what we were doing out there in the field. So fast forward 10 years, we have retail execution teams servicing places like Whole Foods and Sprouts and natural grocers, a team at headquarters making calls in the majority of the SPINS regions, And we have plans to continue bringing value to the partners and the brands in the space and the retailers in the space, in ways beyond what we do today.
Cool. And, to go just a little bit deeper on that, today we have about 200 folks out there in the field just visiting stores every day, right? A lot of what we do is around getting in retail, building relationships, being consistently present, and executing kind of X's and O's at retail. Alongside, we launched brokerage service a couple of years back to really connect that headquarter office to the field. And that's a business we've really been accelerating as well. So we're going to kind of jump into the meat of this, Will. The first question I have for you is kind of around your philosophy on brick and mortar. I think a lot of brands there's a lot of options today, right? More options than I think we've seen in the past kind of 20 years with e-commerce, with kind of D2C options. And even when you think about brick and mortar, there's a lot of different channels that you can look at. And so I think the challenge is really around how do I spend my money as a brand, and what channels actually matter. So I want to ask you your thoughts on why brick and mortar matters, why you believe, obviously we've built this business centered around brick and mortar. Why do you believe that brick and mortar is important? And what is your philosophy when you think about brick and mortar for brands?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're right. There are many different avenues upon which a brand can go to sort of build their presence, right? And I think we saw that sort of boom and bust in the D2C space, right? Where brands were able to connect really closely with their customers and create a relationship and establish sort of a true back and forth with them. And that's incredibly valuable. But I think the same could be said about retail, right? Like, we see sort of influence and interaction as only this digital thing, but in reality, like if you're a brand, a natural food brand looking to get into your natural food stores, all of the people who are working in the stores, each of those locations is a place of influence, right? It's a place that attracts people who believe the same, foundational beliefs about sort of better for you health and what you put in your body matters, right? Like these brick and mortar, especially in the natural space, is entirely a house of influencers, right? The people who work in the stores are having interactions with customers on a daily basis, right? The retailers are constantly sort of promoting what they think is next, right? And so this building a brand is all about getting people excited about it, so much so that they tell their friends, right? And all of a sudden this momentum builds. And I believe brick and mortar serves as an outlet to do that, right? It serves as a place to get a group of people excited about a product, excited about you as a founder or the representation of it, and working with them to help sort of expand the visibility and the awareness and the space that brand has in the accounts, right? And I mean, 85% of sales still come through brick and mortar, so clearly it matters. A lot of these younger, new emerging brands allocate dollars to natural, and the barrier to entry is pretty minimal, right? You need a distributor, but once you're locked and loaded in a distributor, you can go store to store and get product in, right? And I'm a real firm believer that every founder of the brand should be out there selling their product to really understand, what's working and what's not, right? We talk about talking to your customers. There's no better way to connect with your customers, both your customers who are the retailers and your customers who are buying the product. There's no better way to do that than, at store level.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think there's a couple of things that really stand out for me as well in terms of brick and mortar. And number one, it's where a majority of the shoppers with the intent to purchase are, right? Intent to spend dollars. I think some of the challenges online is around discovery, and there still isn't an awesome way to consolidate kind of D2C brands in one place where you can see this spectrum of brands. And so that process is hard. I think the e-commerce stores are trying to figure that out as well, but the overwhelming majority of shoppers still are buying a brick and mortar, and they have the intent to purchase big basket sizes there, right? So if you want to find scale economically, it's going to be a brick and mortar. I think the second one is that, if you're introducing a brand into the marketplace, you're ultimately trying to compete with the brands in your category, right? And so if you're trying to compete with a beverage or a water brand, you can't really compete with these brands unless you appear on the shelf next to them, right? Because you got to get consciously in the shopper's mind that you are an alternative, right? And you are competitive. I heard a great podcast the other day, and it was that brand TBH who is introducing this natural Nutella, and they said, like, we started D2C, but we had to go to the shelf because that's where our shoppers are finding Nutella, right? And so if we want to compete, we have to be there. And so those were two things that really stood out to me.
doubt. And it is such like winning at brick and mortar is about getting your product with more shelf space across more placements, because like eyes lead to sales, right? If you're a single facing in one corner of the store that maybe only a fraction of the shoppers are going to, your ability to reach your core consumer is a lot lower than if you're spread around the accounts, right? I mean, my philosophy is the more space you own, the better, right? And you're not breaking rules to earn that space, but you're supporting the retailers in ways that get them excited about supporting your brand, right? That's the secret, because absolutely right? You cannot attract a stable base of customers if you're not reaching them across other areas of the stores.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we're going to jump into the next question, which seems to be the question that I see founders grappling with the most, right? I think everybody knows that they have to invest money at brick and mortar. Like we said, that's where a majority of the sales are. The problem is there's so many different avenues to spend dollars. If you're in 1,000 retailers, how do you know what to spend money on? You can't spend dollars on all of them because brands have to get funding and they have limited dollars and runway.
Totally.
And so when you think about brands developing their brick and mortar strategy, how would you suggest them thinking about allocating their resources?
Yeah, so I think about it in a couple ways, right? I think about it in the first being like, where can you not lose, right? What authorization can you as a young emerging brand or an established brand not lose, right? What retailer requires your investment dollars, right? Everybody needs it, but there are those who are more important than others, and that's just the nature of the beast, right? I think about it then from what is the return on the dollars I'm going to spend, right? What is the flexibility at store level that can translate into more of those secondary displays, right? Am I sending somebody and spending gas and car allowance and all of this stuff to a store where somebody's just taking a picture of a shelf and walking out? Or can they influence how that brand is showing up in the stores, right? So I'm looking at flexibility. I'm looking at, return and bang for the buck. And then I'm also prioritizing where my biggest challenges are, right? If I'm out of stock consistently in a number one or number two, retailer, that's a problem I got to fix, right? And so my dollars are going to be going towards fixing that problem of an influential, important retailer than maybe sort of maximizing, something else across the market. So it's influence, it's flexibility, and it's really prioritizing, where you have to win, where you really ultimately can't lose.
Yeah, no, and I think it does come down to brands taking a step back and determining what is their core strategy. To your point, am I having a national rollout in Whole Foods that this winning that retailer is core to me opening up a Target or a Kroger or a Safeway? If I need to do that, you should really think about investing dollars to make sure that Whole Foods launch goes right. I think the flip side would be if you're trying to get more distribution and land bigger retailers or distributors, maybe investing in a small independent natural channel in a specific geography where you can build that velocity story, you can build that distribution story, might be a way. Hey, you built all of a sudden this pitch that you can bring to the bigger guys. So I think figuring out this strategy of brands and, like you're saying, where do I have to win is really important.
And I think also just during this time, I think as founders, we want to do everything like yesterday, right? We want to go, Dan, how many times have you told me, like, dude, we need to be thoughtful about this, right? Like, founders are dogs with a bone who want to go fast and don't want to tiptoe to the next thing, right? But in this sort of day and age, I think it's really important to be thoughtful around, if you're a regional brand blowing out something at a national conventional market, this might not be the right time, right? It might be better off, you might be better off spending that money within your home region, ensuring that, all of the influential natural accounts are selling your product, all the places that are, that your distributor is visiting is carrying your product, that you're demoing maybe in the stores that do the most volume within the region. And you're just maybe taking a step back to say, I know that if I do this really well, this one thing in this one region really well, it will lead to opportunities that I can either say yes to or I can say no to, but I still know eventually, right, it'll lead me to where I'm trying to go. It is, I think just a moment to be really thoughtful about how that growth, needs to happen.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in channels? Right, we've done and had field teams and kind of all of the channels, the independent naturals, those mom and pops, those regional chains, in Sprouts, in Whole Foods, in conventional retailers. Talk about what are the differences between the channels, and what are kind of the value adds that brands should be thinking about when they look at those channels?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think having sort of grown up in this space in the natural channel, I may be a little bit, not jaded, but I have found people who are most excited about the brands we represent in more of the natural space, right? In the Whole Foods, in the Sprouts, in the central markets, in the natural grocers, right? These retailers that attract the kind of people who want to be part of the movement that we're involved in, right? Better for you products out there in the market. It's not to say that there aren't great people working in a safe way, but the incentive structures around finding people who really care about what you put into your body are different, right? In some of those locations. They're machines, they're businesses. And I feel like the natural channel are more ecosystems, living things that retain a little bit more flexibility to help that sort of natural space ebb and flow through the different trends and the different sort of new items coming out, right? I think the nice thing about natural as well is there's always a bit more flexibility, right? Like I know brands who have walked into natural stores in Berkeley, California and hand delivered product and got it on shelf, right? That kind of flexibility isn't something that you can do in a Target or in a Kroger, right? Which is, I think, why we as an organization really enjoy that space, right? Because we want to be able to build a relationship, bring value to the owners of the stores, and ultimately then transition some of those, relationships into opportunities for our brand, right? It's a much more friendly, willing to work with you, like willing to sort of see and understand your value, especially if you're showing up saying, hey, what can I do for you today? Right. I think for brands who've scaled, you got to win conventional and you got to invest the right dollars, tracking the right things within that space. But if I'm an emerging brand, natural is certainly the place that I'm, spending my time and energy and dollars.
Right. 100%. So let's move into kind of the current state of retail. I think in my experience, I've been doing this a little bit less than you have in terms of years, but we've seen potentially the most change at retail over the past 2 years with the pandemic and how that's affected the supply chain and staffing. We've seen probably the most change at retail. So can you talk about where we're at today? What does today look like at retail, and what do you expect kind of the next year to look like at retail with where we see the trends going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, COVID was just a pure stress on the system, right? On every aspect, from manufacturers, making products, to distributors packing warehouses and packing trucks, to retailers having to do more with a whole lot less, right? And it feels like the retail environment is often a place, where stores are trying to find the healthy balance between having enough people but not being overstaffed, right? Retailers it's penny margins, right? And so labor is the thing that matters, most. It's the ways in which to sort of drive more money to the bottom line. And I think what COVID did was stress the system so much that it actually tested it. And it's like, kind of putting your hand into a foam ball and seeing it kind of come back up. I don't foresee that ball coming back to where it was, right? I foresee the retail environment learning to live and to deal with less people than it's ever had before, right? Which, again, we made it through. The retailers survived. They did relatively, they did well during that period, and they've learned to adjust to having less people at store. And so ultimately, I think what that creates is just, even back 10 years ago when I started, there was more work to be done than there were hands at store level to do it, right? And that's what created sort of the product sitting in the back not making it to the shelf. It's what created your top seller falling off the shelf because someone stole or the sales tag went missing, right? Like, the inefficiencies that come at retail, I think my assumption is they're a direct result of the having enough people to do the work at the store, right? And so those issues, like they were 10 years ago, now exist just on a bigger scale, right? Full areas of full locations gone unpacked, right? Like, we think about big rushes in grocery, right? The lunch rush used to be this monumental thing, and although it has certainly transitioned a bit, it still matters. Yet, if you're not prepped for either the breakfast rush or the lunch rush, and then ready to restock and refill for the night rush, like, you're just missing out, right? And I think that's what I foresee and what I see happening across the board. Just a lot of great brands missing out because they don't necessarily understand what's happening at retail and the chaos that's ensuing because of the kind of the new age that we're in, right? Where it's not just, load up the stores and rock and roll. It's find the sweet spot between having enough people and having not enough people to get everything done.
Yeah. Can you get specific on kind of, I think there's two sides to that, right? There's some real challenges that brands are actually facing at retail today. But on the flip side, with chaos, there's opportunity, right? So can you get really specific on what are those challenges we're seeing at retail today? And then what are some of those opportunities? How can you parlay those into some action items for brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think brands are still coming to us with some of the key problems, right? I'm out of stock on the shelf. I can't get enough product to it, right? Second one being, I launched 6 months ago, but I still have 40% of my distribution unfulfilled, right? I got voids out there in the market that are eroding my brand's ability to earn its space and, add more when the next reset cycle comes around. And then there are things like, promotions. I have a big promotion. I'm spending thousands of dollars on these promotions and they're not getting executed. I'm launching a new SKU and I can't be sure that it's going to get out, right? Those are all the typical problems that are still happening out there. And so how you parlay those into sort of opportunities, I mean, reducing out of stocks is a direct correlation of how much space your brand has at store and who's there reminding somebody that they need to order more, right? In many cases, unlike those maybe in the DSD system, we're not walking around with guns, right? We're not walking around with handheld devices that are placing orders. We are there to influence somebody and remind them that on a consistent basis, you're out of stock in this number one seller. And by the way, what it's doing is eroding your sales, right? Like, all we're doing is being there to help them recognize the dollar opportunities that are on the table. Same thing with voids, right? You're selling these at this rate, but you're missing out on the second or third best seller. You get that product in, you're going to turn X amount more dollars per store per week in this system, right? Promotions are all about leading up, right? It's the pre-sale, it's the communication, it's the execution, and then it's the fulfillment, right? And I think for us, we love promotions because we're there so often that we don't let a display come down before we refill it, right? We make sure that those orders are placed. So it's not only the allocation you're running through, but it's the orders that come on top of that allocation that really separate, you from the rest of the folks who are maybe getting a national off shelf, but don't have a field team there to remind a buyer to order 10 more cases so you can actually run through the whole promo cycle. It is, I think, a huge value. But it all, again, comes down to being organized, showing up with the right mentality, bringing the right information to the table with the buyers or the decision makers in the accounts, and being there to do the dirty work that will get you those extra cases, right? That will get you that extra space or fill that void or solve that out of stock. And you can't do that from a computer. You can't do that from from an email. It has to be in person.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you look at the trajectory of brands as well and how they grow, it really is a game of kind of your category rankings, right? Like you're trying to move up that spins list. You're trying to show that you can move from number 10 to number 1 in your category. And when you can do that, you can then go pitch to these new retailers. You can open up new pathways, right? I feel like when I first started, right, in 2017, everything was great, right? Everything was moving up and to the right. And I think it was hard for brands to actually leapfrog each other in categories because everybody was doing well, right? I think what I see as a big opportunity today is what you exactly said is there's less staff at store. It's harder to bring in new people because the hiring market is still really competitive. And so what that means is there are a lot of problems at retail. And what brands that if they can focus on a specific retailer or a geography and they can invest and get people in the stores, the difference between velocities of a brand who's investing and a brand who's not investing is massive, right? And you can see these brands start to move up the charts, move up the spins rankings, move up the velocity rankings, because not every brand is up and to the right now. A lot of brands are going down because of all of the voids and out of stocks and then potentially having to cut spend. And so I think now is a great time if you can strategically focus on where you need to win and really double down on that, right? Because everybody is having to make that decision of where do I spend my money and how does it affect my place within the category. So chaos does create opportunity, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
And those brands that are winning out there are not looking at retail as a nice to have, but are looking at it as a have to have, right? And they're looking at it as a have to have, not only through field support like Dirty Hands, but through their own teams who are out there in the market having conversation, influencing buyers, and really showing up as a sole representation of that product, which is an expensive piece, but ultimately every single dollar that's spent on the brand prior to it getting to shelf is lost and wasted if the shelf doesn't have any product to sell, right? If no one knows about your branded store, right? All of it is wasted if the consumer and the customer can't buy your product where it's supposed to be.
Sure. 100%. So let's get a little bit deeper on, so let's say you're at retail, right? You invest in it either through a service company or your own teams. You've got people in these stores. What should people be doing, right? You walk into a store, how do you actually do things? What tactics are you kind of implementing at store to actually show some success?
Yeah. So I think the first thing you're doing is recognizing that you're walking into someone else's territory, right? As we say, you're playing in someone else's sandbox, right? Your brand may be sold there, but if things don't look good, the worst thing you can do is tell somebody they're doing a bad job, right? So check your ego at the door, show up, and then just witness, right? See what's happening, right? Tour the store, right? Are there cases sitting on the floor waiting to get packed out, right? Is it entirely clean, right? Is everything full? Is there more of an easygoing sort of stress-free environment, or is there tension in the air, right? You got to be able to feel where you're walking into, and from that moment understand, paired with both the environment that you're walking into and the opportunities you see, what you can do on that day. And I would say always start on the idea that someone working at the store doesn't know you, they've never heard of you, they've never met you, and relationships are the key to everything. So how do you build a relationship? How do you introduce yourself? How do you show up as somebody that the retailer walks away from that interaction saying like, damn, like I kind of like that dude. Like he was, he looked a little funny, but he was a nice guy, right? I like this shirt, right? Something that leaves them feeling positive about the interaction. And as you show up more often, and as you're checking in things, and you're making sure your product is available, you're able to go to that buyer and say, hey, I'm not on the shelf where I thought I would be, right? I'm supposed to be eye level. I'm on the top shelf. Anything we can do there. He says, sorry, it's out of my hands. It's planogram. Cool. All good. I'll keep showing up. We'll keep driving velocities, and we'll, hopefully over time we can move that thing down. I think when we kind of focus our team at store level, we're thinking about a couple things, right? And they are kind of pathways, they're steps towards success. And the first is distribution, right? You got to have your voids filled. You got to make sure that there is the right authorized products on the shelf, right? The second is placements, right? How many points around the store are you located, right? The more placements you have, the more eyes you have, the more ability you have to sort of drive people to the brand and create the awareness you need. The third is space, right? And an extra facing, although it may seem like nothing, doubles your holding capacity. So if you're running out of stock on a regular basis, 2 facings doubles how many units you can hold on that shelf and allows you to sell through more of it. Position where you are on the shelf, right? And a lot of those independent natural stores, there's more flexibility about what can go where. And eye to thighs buy, as you know, I'm sure one of the first rhymes I ever learned in this business. And then the last piece is price, and price in more of TPRs. How do you drive velocities through temporary price reductions or national off shelves? But then also, how do you do it through things like IRCs or VIPs, right? Like, how can you adjust the price and allow and incentivize the consumer to take a chance on a product they may not have tried before? So distribution, space, placements, promotion, and price, or position and price, really are the things that we ask our team to look at when they're at store.
Right. Yeah, and I think as you go through that checklist, it's kind of a game of consistency, because ultimately what you're trying to do is build velocities through executing those 5 items, right? You walk through the store on every visit and you make sure those things happen. And then as they are happening, all of a sudden your velocities start to creep up. And I think, when people think about store support or merchandising or putting their teams in stores, they think about, okay, well, what did that do to my sales on that visit, right? And that's like just a small part of it, right? Because it's not what it does in that visit. 3 months from now, when you hit those 5 items on the checklist on every visit, all of a sudden your velocities creep up to the point where you can unlock a bigger retailer. You can go into your category review and get to eye level, or expand your placements, or launch innovation, because now you've had that unit story, you've had that velocity story. So I do think that's interesting to see how those 5 items you mentioned, and how we try to talk to our brands, is really be patient, right? Take in that compounding effort, the compounding components of these things, and use that as the stepping stone to kind of take you to the next level.
Totally. Yeah, it is. I mean, like, what do they say? Like, failure at retail is death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? It's not like one day, it's not being out of stock one day in one store, right? But it's being out of stock, 3 days out of the week across 400 of your 500 stores, right? Like, that's a significant amount of sales lost because of that, right? It's not this one giant thing that ruins brands or sends them towards, discontinuation. It is voids not being addressed. It's promos not being executed. It's people not knowing about the brand at store. And it's you just collecting dust on the shelf. That's like, it's a slow, painful demise. And that's the problem, right? Because only when you realize there's a problem do you try to go solve it. By that point, it's the damage is already done, right? You don't get those missed sales back.
Right. 100%. Talk a little bit about, I think brands as well, they've got to make decisions on trade spend, and not just like, should I have field teams, but what should I do there, right? Should I invest in promotions? And how deep do I go in those? How many promotions? We've seen shipper programs, and there's a various amount of things that brands can kind of spend at retail. What are some of the things that, some of the most successful brands we've worked with invest in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a healthy promotional cycle is certainly one. Specifics I think vary by brand and category, and I think there's an argument to be made if you're building a brand, right, and you're going all the way, maybe think about a much deeper investment in a promotion than the typical 15 or 20% OI 4 times a year, right? Like, do a BOGO, right? Do a BOGO in your prime time, where you can drive people to the brand and get them excited about the product and get it into their hands, right? Like, use it a little bit more strategically to drive the trial than I think most brands are thinking about it right now. Granted, again, very expensive. And all of these investments, if you don't have a plan to support and execute them, don't do them, right? It's not, unless you're going to make sure that promo hits and is successful so you can do it again next year. It's a risk, right? It's a risk. It's an investment that doesn't have the support needed or the insurance to make sure that it really rolls.
That blew
Yeah,
my mind. Like when I first started, I was kind of a little naive in brands investing in these promotions, right? And then as I started to get more experience in the field and what we were doing, it was like something really eye-opening that it was like 50% of promotions actually didn't happen. If you didn't touch them, if you didn't have somebody going into the store, like a massive amount of them didn't happen. So I think your point is valid that, yeah, you want to make sure that you invest in them. But if you are going to invest in them, you got to figure out how you can support them, right?
Yeah, and promotions are like, at the end of the day, what a promotion is a tag on a shelf that says the price is different than it used to be, right? Like a promotion is a yellow tag in Whole Foods. That's it, right? Without that yellow tag coming down, like it doesn't matter, right? You're not attracting anybody at the shelf to buy the product. They're happily getting a discount when they take it to the shelf and they realize it's on sale. But unless you have that, unless those off shelves are maximized, unless there's enough product to really drive it through, you're just sort of, you're wasting money.
Sure.
And again, it's I don't see this, and this was something I kind of had to come to grips with, right? Like it's no one's fault. Like it's just how the system is. It's just how the system runs, right? And when you're dealing with 40,000 SKUs in a single store, there are going to be things that slip through the cracks, right?
Sure.
And you either sort of live with that and you say, well, there'll be problems and that's it, or you go to solve it, right? But you need to realize if you're not solving it, it doesn't, and you don't know about it, that doesn't mean that the problems aren't happening.
Yeah.
I think we see that on most promotional cycles with brands. One SKU doesn't hit, right? Or a UPC is off or something out of our portfolio. Every single promo period, at least one brand has something that goes wrong. That is only resolved because someone at store level said, hey, this is supposed to be this way, but it's actually this way. Something's wrong here. Can you run it up the chain?
Sure. 100%. And I think, one last thing I touch on there is I've heard this a lot from brands and from some operators that I've spoken to, but going deeper now on promotions seems to be kind of the consensus because of the fact that with inflation and I'm shopping and buying products and it's that bill is just, ramping up. Mm-hmm. Shoppers want bigger price cuts now, right? Like mm-hmm. they are to drive trial and switch brands with deeper price cuts. So I think, not only is deeper promotions in a normal time good to drive trial, but especially now when the shopper's looking for some relief, it's a great strategy to be thinking about.
Totally. Yeah, it is. With inflation, it'll be interesting to see how it all, pans out. Do prices really ever come down? I don't know. Or do they come down when stuff goes on sale? And then are people stocking up more often then? We're going to have to wait and see what, how this inflationary pressure and price increases, how it all sort of irons out. But
sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Sure. So I'm going to ask you one more, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. A lot of the brands that we work with or that we're talking to in the pipeline, there's some mix of brands thinking about some short-term things, some short-term execution goals or projects. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of brands who are thinking about how do I work that into how do I work field support into my long-term strategy, right? And I think the challenge that brands have when making that decision is they want to know what the return on investment is, right? Like I'm going to invest short-term for this promotion because I know that there's value in that promotion. I'm investing dollars, but then I'm not sure I need field teams after that, right? Mm-hmm. And other brands are having more of that. Hey, if I do this long term, if I'm better positioned and in stock and closing my voids, that's a strategy I want longer term. So how do you think about the short term execution goals versus thinking long term at retail? What are the differences there?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple things, right? And I've said this before with you and a couple others. I don't think we've ever sold dirty hands to a brand who doesn't think they have a problem, right? Like we are a solution provider out there. And until someone gets hit in the face with that problem in a major way, or unless they have experience working at retail and know the real reality of what happens, right? Like they're not interested, right? They're not interested in it until their investor walks into a Whole Foods, on a Sunday morning and sees their product out of stock and does it again on Monday and it's out of stock, and on Tuesday and Wednesday it's still out of stock. That's when brands say, I have a problem that I need to fix, right? So that creates sort of the need, right? And that creates the short-term priority. But I'm also very confident that the problems you think you have are probably worse in real life than you think they are, right? So you may have voids, but what those voids are doing are leaving you with less shelf space than you're supposed to have, and eroding your velocities, right? Like you just think you're missing an item, when in reality it's completely influencing the production of that shelf, right? And so I think most brands coming to us understand, right, that these are problems that they need fixing and are looking for the right solutions. They now may be a bit more focused on short term, but I think what we're able to do is to show them the benefits of the long-term investment, right? And the long-term investment, that's a whole lot cheaper than having, your army of brand people out there in the street, right? And so I think it is, we see sort of short-term way as a way to show you what's going on out there in the market, knowing that eventually that long-term support, if you're really truly invested in growing as a brand, is something you're going to have to, kind of invest in and pick and choose what stays and what goes, on your P&L.
Yeah, no, and I think, and you said this earlier in the conversation, but I would really urge brands to think about their strategy and what you said it right, where they have to win. And because ultimately at the end of the day, and I empathize with founders, people cannot invest in retail everywhere. It's just too expensive. But what happens is if you invest really short term, yeah, you might crush the promotion, but there's going to be voids opening up 6 months from now, right? Or out of stocks issues 6 months from now. So what I think about is brands strategically thinking about what retailers they have to win, and when are there those category reviews or pitches that they need compelling unit stories to go to with, right? So if I know 6 months from now that review for Whole Foods is coming up, I want to be investing in Whole Foods long term so that I have that compelling pitch, right? And so just stepping back and really saying, where are my must wins versus where are the places I can afford to lose? And then being really intentional about investing around those events are critical.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think we as brands, there's a lot of opportunity at every door, right? And a lot of things that cost a ton of money, right? Slotting fees. Maybe this isn't the year to go after slotting, after a new conventional retailer, right? Maybe it's the year to double down and make sure your natural volume is superior to where it was last year, so you can go back and maybe negotiate some of those slotting fees, right? Have more leverage in the conversations than being the hungry pup who wants the opportunity to show they can sell in Walmart. Maybe this isn't the year to do that, right? It's prioritizing, it's understanding what the long-term, goals really are, and that, during this time, you have to be spending your dollars in the places that really, I believe, influence and make contact with your consumers and your customers, right? Like all of the dollars spent this year and next year feel like they should correlate directly with how it impacts, the customer out there in the stores.
Absolutely. So with that, we're going to open this up to some Q&A. We've already got a question in here. So if you guys want to pop any of those burning questions in there, we will ask Will those. So we're just going to start with the first one in here. You talked a little bit about this, but what kind of promotions are you seeing work the best right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I still think brands are running the 20%, OI. I think one thing that we've seen some brands do well during, especially kind of last year, is think around their promotional strategy less as TPRs and off shelves and more as IRC pushes, right? Like, let's take that $10,000 you're going to spend on this promotion and let's drive it towards hang tags or IRCs, right? And let's flood the top velocity stores out there in the market to drive action and velocity, through less of the traditional promotional cycles and more of the sort of ad hoc, more flexible focus here, put it on this SKU so it drives velocity. I think that's a tactic to be thinking about, as we're juggling how to spend the bucks.
Cool. And for anybody who wants to ask, there's a Q&A section at the bottom, so you can just pop that open. So the next one we have is, what's the right frequency of service for small brands who don't yet have high velocities?
In my opinion, it all depends on the category you're in, right? If you're a beverage, you're competing in the space that is high velocity, right? And so you don't have you don't really have the luxury of not being there on at least a weekly basis, right? If you're olive oil, maybe you're able to survive with more of a monthly visit than something like a weekly visit. But I would say for young brands, really prioritize what stores you want to win in, right? And prioritize what stores are going to do significant velocities for you, and what stores have flexibility, and focus the time and effort in those, and maybe look at your B stores or your C stores as something you're seeing every other week or every 3 weeks, and really kind of donate your time to the places that are going to show the highest return if you're there.
Yeah. And I would also, it really does depend on where you are in your journey. And I'll give 2 specific examples, right? So if you are a small brand who doesn't yet have those velocities, but what your goal is right now is to unlock new retailers, right? Or unlock distributors. I think investing in a channel like the independent channel, where you can walk into these stores direct and sell it right on into the store and get it right on the shelf, is a place you'd want to invest in sending people, right? Or having service, because all of a sudden you can spend a small amount of money and gain a bunch of stores that you can then go into a retailer pitch with, or go talk to a distributor, because now you have some anchor accounts. So if you're in that journey where you haven't opened up that anchor account yet, right? But you're trying to get to a place where you can open up a distributor or a retailer, then thinking about going into the independent channel is a great place to do that. I think if you're one of those brands who maybe you're a small brand, you don't have the velocities yet, but you got into like a local program at Whole Foods, right? And so you're in Southern Pacific Whole Foods. And for you to really stay on that shelf, you do need to win, right? And you need to show some velocities. And knowing the velocities that come out of Whole Foods, you're probably going to want to invest deeper and have people in the stores more often in a place like Whole Foods, where those products are just turning left and right. So I think, I'd urge, whoever asked this question to just take a step back and really think, where are you in your journey, and what is the goal that you're looking for? What's that outcome? And then we can kind of talk about, okay, well, what's the right strategy to get there?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think for young emerging brands, right, recognize that your success in this game is going to be dependent upon you cracking the code of like your recipe, right? Like what are the things that your brand needs to be successful? And the second you understand that is the second that you walk into a buyer's office with things you need in order to be able to sort of drive it forward. So if I'm a beverage, I need space in the cold box, right? I need multiple facings to keep it in stock. Part of my recipe is I come in and I do demos every Saturday or Sunday to meet the lunch rush, right? I need a price point at this. And the second you have that is the second you understand whatever retailer you go to, right? These are the things you need to get done. And then this is ultimately going to be the result of you accomplishing those pieces in your recipe. So it is, very brand specific.
Sure. Another question was, can you talk about perishable brands where the opportunity for incremental displays are a bit more limited? How do you increase the visibility outside of, just filling out of stocks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the larger retailers typically have a little bit more flexible space, right? Maybe there's a coffee bar cooler in a retailer. Maybe there's a deli cooler. Maybe there is a bunker or a place where your brand might be able to be cross merchandised. Maybe there are coolers up near the registers, right? I think understanding for a perishable brand, you're going to have more opportunity to get off shelf and get in secondary locations in the bigger stores that have more space, right? In a place like New York City, it doesn't matter how great your brand is, getting off shelves in New York is unlikely, right? Because unless it's a buy in a K-Stack deal, the stores are just very small and don't necessarily have the space to have something, in multiple locations. So understanding, I mean, I think that aspect should come into, you thinking about where you spend your time, right? If a Whole Foods has, if you're a yogurt and a Whole Foods has a coffee bar and a checkout cooler, that's probably a place you want to spend more time in and see if you can get into some of those coolers, or at least get into them during your promotional cycles. So it is, it's limited, but then you also have the ability, I think, over time to, think about building the brand in more of a, with coolers, right? With plug-in coolers, with barrel coolers, right? These are things and tactics our brands use often to great success, right? It increases holding capacity. It's a giant billboard in the store. And although you need somebody there to manage things like, rolling coolers, they do have really amazing upside when managed the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So really, really know your stores, know what the actual opportunity is, and then think about how do you get there. I would also say in the coolers, there is a lot more flexibility in certain retailers to kind of expand your facings. And so obviously keeping that stock is important, but also the battleground, getting those elbows in there, right? And pushing some of those other competitors out of the way and expanding those facings and shelves is a great way to increase that visibility.
Totally. Yeah, as long as you're working with what's allowed within the retailer, right, and allowing the people who make the decisions at the stores to drive things forward, you're in good shape. They're the gatekeepers. But as Dan said, there are so many stores that have core sets and are not necessarily planogram, head to toe. And those are the places, again, that have the flexibility you're interested in as a natural emerging brand.
Sure. So another one here, any keys to help with out of stocks when distributors are consistently late restocking?
Yeah, knowing about it right away, right? Every day that passes when you're out of stock at a warehouse is sales you don't get back, right? And so one of the big value adds for our team is being able to be at store to say, hey, this item is been out of stock in the last couple of my stores. Is anybody else seeing that same thing? From there, we can check distribution reports to see if products are out of stock, and then send that information to the brand so they can quickly get it on the radar of a UNFI or a KHE to say, hey, you're not ordering enough. It is a constant battle. Don't expect it to get any easier. I think having people who know how those systems work on your side is very important, right? So either through your broker or through an advisor, somebody who can help you talk to the right people about increasing the orders. Because if you don't, and you sort of just live with it, things don't get better. But the way to solve it first comes with recognizing that it's the problem, and having good details and data to back it up.
Cool. Absolutely. So another one, this one's interesting. So it seems like you guys are providing brokerage services today. We know that a lot of brokerages don't necessarily have big field teams. How do you see your brokerage and field team working together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some brokers out there who have great field teams, right? And so we don't want to say it's not something that exists, but I have seen over the years that support get pulled back, right? By big players who maybe during COVID weren't incentivized to send people to the stores, right? And so they've never gone back to it. They've never reinvested in it. And yet the reasons why those individuals showed up at store, the reasons are still there, right? The problems still exist. The information that the brands need or the broker needs in order to make the best decisions or to understand what's happening out there, like those haven't changed, right? And so we see an opportunity to pair the fundamental values of Dirty Hands, right? Limited portfolios, great partnerships, being of service, not being afraid to get our hands dirty, right? Those are the things we think we can take to that space. And we have already taken to the headquarter space. And we believe that when we can pair the headquarter relationships with what happens at store level, the ability to drive velocities and bring value to both the brands and the retailers is going to open up in a big way. And so we're excited. Our core belief is that great brands should expect more from their partners, right? And I think we've earned the right to say that, and the standard in merchandising, and we're going to be earning that same sort of standard, at the headquarter level as well.
Yeah. No, and I think what's most exciting for me is being able to pair pitches at the headquarter office with the assurances of making sure those things get executed. It's much easier to pitch new programs with retailers when you can say, "Hey, I'm going to have people in these stores every day," right? Takes the risk away from the retailer, as well as then being able to take category information and real-time insights back to the headquarters to say, here's what we're seeing in the field, and here's why we think this pitch makes sense, right? So two of the things that I think are most exciting with what the field team that we have allows us to do there.
Absolutely. And, ultimately we are a solutions provider, right, for brands. So if merchandising is your problem, come to Dirty Hands. If headquarters is your problem, we'll come to Dirty Hands. If you're looking to maximize united system across both fronts, we're happy to talk to you about that as well.
Cool. So that is actually the last question that we have. So we are going to cut it here. I'm just going to put up our information. I appreciate everybody joining. Thanks for taking the time with Will and I. Here are socials. Follow us. We're putting good information out there consistently. And with that, here's our information. Will and I are always willing to talk. Here's our emails. Any questions at all, just reach out and we will get back to you. Anything, Will, on your end before we go?
Yeah, Dan, what was dirtyhands.com previous to what it is now?
Yeah, so it was dhstoresupport.com. So we actually had dirtyhands.com was an adult website prior. That was fun, telling my mom I worked for Dirty Hands and having her open up an adult website. So we finally won that dirtyhands.com domain. You can visit us there. We still have our emails at DH Store Support, but those will be changing soon. So
big news. Yeah, a lot of less surprises. Really kudos to the Dirty Hands tech team for getting that done. So yeah, excited.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. We appreciate it. And we're having another couple of webinars in the next couple of weeks. So check out our socials. We have the information there, and register. And we look forward to chatting with you soon.
Awesome.
All right, guys.
Thanks, all. Appreciate you joining.